Oh, this is unreal. Just a few days ago, I was talking about how I really hoped that the Terminator franchise was dead and buried. And here we have this article from Bounding Into Comics, dated December 21st, 2022. After the disaster of Terminator Dark Fate, James Cameron claims franchise relaunch in discussion, shares the direction he would take it. Oh man, obviously we've talked many times about how the franchise has endured some rather lackluster sequels after Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I thought that Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was okay, but nothing special. Terminator Salvation is to be commended for going in a very different direction and taking the action into the future. The less said about Terminator Genesis and Terminator Derp Fail, the better. So let's continue with the article. Avatar: The Way of Water director James Cameron continued to make the press rounds to promote the film and revealed that there are discussions to relaunch the Terminator franchise after the failure of Terminator Dark Fate. They just can't let it go, can they? It had its day. It had its day. It has to be put out to pasture. The story has been done. Personally, I think the conclusion of the Terminator franchise is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the director's cut, with the original ending. The one where Sarah is an old woman on the park bench and she's spending time with John Connor and her young granddaughter. That was it. That was the story told. We didn't need any more movies after that, but they just left it open for something, and that something became 4 really unnecessary movies, the last 2 of which, as I've said, were really awful. So let's get back to the article. Cameron appeared on the Smartless podcast, where he was asked if he felt he had responsibility to push a message in his films. Oh, God. He responded, yeah, well, I mean, the Avatar films are about the environment. I'm not dealing with AI. If I were to do another Terminator film and maybe try to launch that franchise again, which is in discussion, why? But nothing has been decided. I would make it much more about the AI side of it than bad robots gone crazy. When was it ever about bad robots gone crazy? We already knew what Skynet's mission was. When asked to provide clarity on what he meant when he refers to AI, Cameron responded, I think it was more to do with understanding human consciousness, so that we collectively, human technologists, can create an intelligence that functions the way we do. Generally, they call it AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. That it's not just designed to play chess and beat your ass at chess. It's designed to solve all kinds of problems. So it needs more of consciousness in the way that we view and react to the world, he elaborated. Has he watched any of the sequels after Terminator 2 Judgment Day? Seriously, this problem-solving artificial general intelligence he's talking about sounds very similar to what Skynet was in Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, when it was activated by the military in order to stop a computer virus. And then we saw how that turned out. And then, of course, we literally had an anthropomorphic representation of Skynet in Terminator Salvation, played by Helena Bonham Carter. She was controlling Marcus, played by Sam Worthington. So we got a sense of Skynet as an actual consciousness. This approach was continued in Terminator Genesis. Matt Smith played the T-5000 Terminator, which also was a physical manifestation of Skynet, and he took over John Connor. Later on in the film, he represented Skynet as a hologram. So essentially what you get at the end of Terminator Genesis is Pops, the T-800, fighting Skynet, which has taken the form of John Connor. But I have to say, I think that this wasn't the right approach, because I believe what actually made Skynet more sinister for us, the audience, is that as an antagonist, Skynet was unseen. It was basically invisible. All we saw was the devastating effects of its consciousness, its intelligence and power. All we saw were the machines, the cyborgs, and the hunter-killers it controlled. We didn't need Skynet to be reduced to being represented by a person, by a man or a woman. By making it a person, it sort of takes away some of the menace and terror of the unseen nature of Skynet. It's a lot like the Borg, actually. For years, the Borg were represented on Star Trek as being purely a collective hive mind of machines, acting in unison, with no centralized intelligence pulling the strings. But then, in Star Trek First Contact, we were introduced to the Borg Queen, who is essentially the central controller of the hive, and as a result, she essentially becomes a bog-standard supervillain. And although I was okay with the idea of having a Borg Queen, because Alice Krige did a great job in the role, and so too did Susanna Thompson on Voyager, but I could still see why some people believed that this idea undermined the concept of the Borg to a degree, because the Borg lost some of their mystery, and indeed a good deal of what made them so dangerous. Suddenly, the threat they posed went from being a collective force. You know, you can take out one drone, but it doesn't change anything. The collective continues because drones are expendable. You're not being given a primary face of evil to fight against. You're fighting something that feels more like a force of nature. But when the Borg structure is radically altered to being a top-down hierarchy with a boss at the very top of it, then the Borg concept is weakened because suddenly the Borg have a single point of failure. Take out the Borg Queen, and the entire collective dies. Now, I acknowledge I'm sort of going off on a little bit of a tangent here, talking about the Borg and Star Trek in a video about Terminator, but the point is, I would compare Skynet a little bit to the collective consciousness of the Borg, and I think that this issue was handled very well in Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, because at the end of that film, John Connor and Catherine Brewster are trying to find the central computer core of Skynet. They want to destroy it. But in the end, all they find is a fallout shelter for VIPs. As John finally realizes at the end of the movie, there was no system core. It was software in cyberspace. Judgment Day was not something that could be stopped. It had to be survived. There was no central location from which to attack Skynet. It was everywhere. It was in the cloud. It was decentralized. And that's why I don't think it was a good idea that both Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis ultimately depicted Skynet as a person. So, anyway, to conclude this video, I wouldn't be surprised if the Terminator franchise did have yet another relaunch, because right now, the movie world is all abuzz with Cameron's latest blockbuster, Avatar: The Way of Water, which is predictably doing very well at the box office. So I think the better it does, the more interest might be generated in giving Cameron another shot at the Terminator franchise. Obviously, I really hope not. But if after 4 sequels, Hollywood studios and filmmakers still haven't figured out that the Terminator story is utterly exhausted, maybe they never will. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious, do you think that the Terminator franchise can be salvaged? Can it be rebooted and brought back to its former glory? Or maybe you think that the franchise has one more decent story left in it. And if so, what would you do differently? What would you do to rejuvenate this series? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.